but then a love for our spouse. Isn't that going to help create and maintain an atmosphere of love if we express and show a love for our spouse? Husbands, love your wives. How? As Christ also loved the church, as we've studied Ephesians 5:25. And the older women, one of the things they were to teach the younger women was to love their husbands there in Titus 2 and verse 4. And regularly expressing our love for our children. You remember the psalmist said in Psalm 127 that children are what from the Lord? A blessing, a heritage from the Lord. It talked about happy is the man whose quiver is full. Speaking of, has many children, blessed that way. And so that's where it begins, isn't it? Creating an atmosphere of love. It begins, of course, with our love for God, and that being center of our heart and our home, instilling that in the hearts of our children, demonstrating a love for our spouse, and then for our children. Right there, we will have a great foundation of creating an atmosphere of love in our home. Anything you'd add to that? Those comments, those thoughts? Okay, Jeff?
I thought the one at the end of Galatians 5, that self-control is a big one, setting a good atmosphere.
Yeah, so in Galatians 5, we have the fruit of the Spirit, right? And all of them we need to have in our character as a Christian. And you think about in connection with the home, how each of these are so essential and so profitable to creating an atmosphere of love and then maintaining that atmosphere of love in our homes. But in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness or meekness, and then self-control. And all of them, Jeff in particular emphasized that last one, self-control. Why did that one stand out to you in particular, Jeff?
It's a human nature to let loose sometimes, and especially it's easy to let loose on your own family, where you might control yourself more when you're out or in others, but when you're in your home and you're tired and kids are getting on your nerves, it can be easy to lose that self-control and pop off in a way you ought not, or let anger come out in ways that it shouldn't. And I think we will tend to do that around those we're closest to more than we might even those that when we're out in the world.
Yeah, great point. So those we're most comfortable with, kind of the expression letting our hair down. Sometimes we allow ourselves to get too comfortable in the sense that we don't behave ourselves like we ought to with our own family members, where we would not speak and act like that here, or hopefully, or with others, but now we're in our home. We're going to do that with our spouse. We're going to do that with our children. And you can see if we don't have self-control, how that's going to take away from this atmosphere of love that we want to have, characteristic of our homes. Okay, good thoughts. Appreciate that. Jason?
To me, I think about selflessness. If we're going to create this atmosphere of love, you have to always remember that you are a parent. And I think oftentimes that as parents, we think, well, I need my time. I need to, there are things that I want to do that maybe, what you want to do doesn't really fit my schedule. But you're the parent. And so we have to make sure that we're sacrificing ourselves. We took on that responsibility when we had children. And so if we're going to instill a proper sense of love in them, especially as a father and as a mother too, it's selflessness. And we're going to give of ourselves to train them, to teach them, to provide for them. And sometimes that means not being able to do things that we might want to do.
Okay, that's a big one, isn't it? And something we might lose sight of that we need to be reminded of. Selfishness. Am I being self-centered? And of course, there's so many scriptures dealing with the Christian that teaches us not to do that. one of the things we studied in men's class Monday night was the wisdom from above and the wisdom from below. And one of the things that's characteristic of the wisdom from below in verse 16 of James 3 is self-seeking. And when you look at the wisdom from above, it's going to be the opposite of that, but self-seeking. We cannot be that way in the home, especially as the leader of the home, as one of the parents in the home. When we became parents, well, we signed up then to be focused on, when we got married, focused on our spouse, become a parent, focused on raising our children and giving of ourselves to them. And so that's a big one. Other thoughts or comments? April?
See, the words that we speak, I think can change the atmosphere of a home so much. And not only the specific words, but the tone in which you speak can make such a difference. And so, of course, that's first needs to be in the parents to each other, the parents to the children, and then trying to enforce that among siblings, I think could be a challenge, but it really, I think parents need to set that tone for speaking words of kindness and encouragement.
Okay. So the way we speak to one another, the tone, the words we use, certainly is going to add to or take away from creating an atmosphere of love. And we have to check ourselves, and we have to keep our children in line in that regard as we parent, right? The tone of voice, the words that we use, that there's kindness and not harshness. We know there's proverbs that speak about the importance of our words and how we express something and how a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Well, it's true in all relationships, true in the home. Norm P., do you have your hand up?
One of the ways you can prepare the atmosphere is making sure that, for my part, being a husband and father, that my kids, though they are important, understand that I love my wife. And she was the one, before they were ever born, that I gave my oath to, my word to love her the rest of her life. And how important that is to me needs to be seen and understood by them in every way that I conduct myself at home. So that they, when they get old enough to go seeking their partner, they will see something that God established with the husband and wife. The children are a result of that happy union. But that's the preeminent part. Because that's where my oath came in. That doesn't diminish the love that I have for them. Right. But as far as teaching them and bringing them up, they have to see that relationship firm and established and understand their part in it. That I will give her preference because she is my wife. She is their mother. And that pecking order needs to be firm and established so that it is understood that when they grow up and they're going to start their own families, they have a model to which they can then move towards.
Thank you. Go ahead.
The Bible is full of the examples of where, impartiality is a big deal, right? God is no respecter of person. And you can look at, Isaac and Ishmael, you can look at Joseph and all of his brothers, and whenever there's a favoritism in the mix, it builds animosity and maybe even hatred and things like that. And if you've got a bunch of kids, the quiver full like you're talking about, you've got a guy over here that's your right-hand man for this job, and this one over here, that's the right-hand man for that job, your go-to guy and everything like that. And you get to even maybe giving the impression to the other ones that you have a favoritism. So with the love comes the justice and the balance of the fairness, and that can really be a challenge because it's unintentional sometimes that you call on the right-hand guy when you can call on the other one too.
Right. Okay, good thoughts. One of the lessons we covered previously was learning from Bible examples, and those are some of the characters that we studied because we can learn good things and we can learn some things we want to avoid. And one of those things we would definitely want to avoid in our home, that's not going to create an atmosphere of love, but animosity and strife and even hatred, as we saw with Jacob's sons towards Joseph that was shown to Jacob by his father and mother, Isaac and Rebekah, with Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob seems to carry that onto his home, sadly, and it caused a lot of problems, and it will in ours as well. Appreciate that. Good thoughts. All right. Anyone else? So here in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7, we have this wonderful text about these characteristics of love. And again, to create an atmosphere of love in our homes, each family member, beginning with the husband and wife, beginning with the father and mother, developing these characteristics of love. Love suffers long, or love is patient. That's a big one right there, right? That gets you, it gets me. Patience, right? Love suffers long, it's patient. It's kind. April hit on this earlier, Ephesians 4:32 on the PowerPoint and on your question sheet. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. So kindness is going to help create that atmosphere of love in our homes. Love does not envy, does not parade itself, it's not puffed up, it's not arrogant, so it's humble, right? Love does not behave rudely. It does not seek its own. That gets back to what Jason was saying about being selfish and self-centered. Love is not provoked. It thinks no evil, or it doesn't keeps no accounts of evil or wrong done to it. Love does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails, he goes on to say. But many times this is read at wedding ceremonies, the husband and wife, but it applies obviously as writing to the church in Corinth to all Christians, but how beneficial, yes, it will be in our marriages and in our homes when we have these characteristics of love and adopt them into our heart and our character. It will indeed help create an atmosphere of love in our homes, right? Other thoughts, comments? Okay. Todd? What number is that?
555.
If you'll turn your handbook to 555, please. I'd ask Todd to lead this hymn where love is in the home. 555. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So, question 2, what application can we make to family life from Proverbs 15:17 and 17:1. Proverbs 15, verse 17, and chapter 17, verse 1. So let's go back to that book of wisdom. Bonnie, if you'll read 15:17, and Todd, if you read 17, verse 1.
Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it.
And better is a dry morsel and quietness with it than a house full of feasting with strife.
Okay. Similar thoughts, right, in these two verses. So what application can we make from those two verses to family life? What do you think? Just supplying food is not enough, and even when it's in abundance, right? What's most important? Right? Love, peace, tranquility in the home, right? A lot of homes, sadly, are robbed of this because individuals are not stepping up to fulfill the roles that God has given to them. They're not, going back to the first question, they're not doing those things that help create an atmosphere of love, just the opposite. So there's many homes that may be big, and there may be wealth there and abundance of food, but it's not a home you want to live in. It's not a home you want to grow up in. It's not people that you probably want to be around because of their character or lack thereof. So sometimes a family can have very little, and yet they can have so much, right? Sometimes a family can have very little, and yet they have everything because they have God, they have a love for Him, a love for one another, and they're seeking God in their life. You can lack materially, you can lack financially, and yet you can be far greater blessed because the home is filled with love and not with hatred. It's filled with peace and not with strife. And as one author said, the best things in life cannot be bought with money. Even if you had the largest bank account, a family without love has no real happiness, right? There's a psalm in Psalm 37, or a passage in Psalm 37. I want to read verse 16. Psalm 37, verse 16. And David, a man after God's own heart, he writes here, a little that a righteous man has is better than the riches of many wicked. Just a little that a righteous man has. Because we know, as Paul said in 1 Timothy 6, we brought nothing into this world. We're going to take nothing with us when we leave. He said, contentment with godliness is great gain, right? And so when you have love instead of hatred, when you have peace instead of strife, that's the home that is blessed, and that's the home that we want to, hopefully that we already have, but that if we don't, that we want to help create and then maintain for the good of everyone in that home, right? Any thoughts or comments on these verses in Proverbs, or even what we just read in Psalm 37? Go ahead, Jason.
I think just thinking about the title of the lesson, this idea of success, and kind of tying in what we were talking about on Monday night with worldly wisdom versus heavenly wisdom. The world is going to try to teach our children that success is based on the abundance of things, and we have to make sure that we combat that with life is not about the abundance of things. That doesn't signify success. Just because that's what the world tells you, it signifies it. So we have to do a very good job training our children to understand, even at a young age. You know, it's not about getting the A in class. It's about being of good character and being kind and sacrificing for others. And that is true success, and we develop that at the home.
Right. There's plenty of wealthy people, famous people that are miserable, and sometimes you'll get a good quote directly from them about how money doesn't bring happiness. It doesn't bring satisfaction. Remember what you said, Jason, remind me, what Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, verse 15. He had this man seemingly maybe interrupt Jesus while he's teaching, but he said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." He said, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator?" And he said, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." Well, sadly, a lot of people's lives revolve around the abundance of the things that they possess. That must not be the case for the Christian. That our blessings abound in Christ and because of Christ and our relationship to Him, and because of the home that we are seeking to build and to maintain in accordance with God's will. All right, other thoughts, comments? Shirley?
You hear so many people about when their parents pass away, and there's so much bickering and fighting, and it's terrible. There were 7 of us, and my mother and daddy passed away. There was not one word of any comment, as far as
Anger or hostility or resentment, or yeah.
I told all my siblings, if I had anything of mother and daddy's that they wanted that bad, just ask me and I would be glad to give it to them. But we went through all that and not a word.
Yeah.
And I think that's great, because so many families just are tore apart.
Yeah, sometimes even Christians. And it really sometimes shows ourselves for what we really are, exposes our heart, our character in those moments. Right.
But they gave us a lot.
Yeah. So maybe that passage in Luke 12 made you think of that, your own personal experience with your family, 7 of you, and Shirley was saying how when her father and mother passed and whatever was left to the children. Now, thankfully, none of them were arguing, we weren't bickering, they weren't fighting over it. But so often what we see in Luke 12, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me, we see that played out all the time in the world. And again, we can't control the other person, but we have to control ourselves. And sometimes we're not always dealing with brethren, we're not always dealing with Christians, but sometimes it is members of the church and they don't behave as they ought to in such moments. But again, we got to remember what's most important and what it's all about, right? Okay, other thoughts or comments? Question 3 asks, what important role can and should the dinner table serve in the family's life? The dinner table. Is that a foreign concept, or does that ring a bell? Yeah. Yeah, there may be a table and some chairs, but you got to get everybody to it, right? Okay. Well, do you have fond memories, those of you who are older, do you have fond memories of the dinner table? And you still do, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, we would sit at the dinner table 30, 40 minutes after your talking, and I think it's important for families to eat together. Too many times today, they're running here and there and everything, they're not together enough.
Right. So Shirley said lots of times, even after we got done eating at the table, we'd stay there another 30, 40 minutes just talking, just visiting. And too often, we're running here and there, and we're not sitting down at the dinner table with one another. But here's some things I wrote down. It can and should provide an occasion each day, or at least multiple times a week, for everyone in the family to sit down together and to communicate about school, about work, about family, about sports, about plans for the next day or that week for about the church and spiritual things, about the Bible, and on, the things at the dinner table can provide the opportunity for. Number two, it's a time for prayer together. It's a time for Bible discussion together. Number three, it's a time for maybe serious conversations, but also opportunity and time to laugh together. It's a time to have no phones and no TV. There may be times where you sit down and eat and watch something together, but there also needs to be regular times where that's not going on, and those things are shut off, and it's just the family. Special time for the family to bond and connect. Okay, and so I too have fond memories of the kitchen table and of the dining room table and the many meals, and I know April has that as well with her family, and gathering around the table to eat, and all the company to come in and gather around the table to eat and visit, and those moments for the family life are so important, I believe, to have spiritual success. It's connected to that. Go ahead, Jeff.
Every family's different, but you alluded to it. We always found it when the kids were growing up a great time just to do a really quick, we might find one of those kind of daily reading things or something. It takes 5 minutes, but just to do that as well as pray before every meal was just something that worked well for our family. And then as they got older, like you said, you had to keep the boyfriends from calling and all that kind of stuff, or take the phones away and those kind of things. But it was just, for us, that was a good time to do something like that. So.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. Jason?
I was thinking about, when we would sit down at the supper table, it would be a time for bonding and unifying. And so I think about the example that we, as a family, are also setting toward the church. And we're supposed to be a family within the church. And so if we develop that unity within our own family, that oftentimes happens at the supper table when you've got this time together to see how other people's days have gone and different struggles that they may have dealt with at school or at work, and you can kind of work on those together. We're setting them up we should be setting them up to be better members of a church, to be unified, to be together. And I think that every opportunity that we have, whether it's at the supper table or wherever, to create that sense of bond and unity.
Sometimes it may be at the restaurant table, but eat together, spend time together. Norman, Jason, pass these out, please. Appreciate it. There's an article I wanted to share with you and read together. That was kind of too much maybe to get up on the PowerPoint, so I just made copies of it. But it's an article written back in the late 90s, I believe, by Brother Connie Adams, entitled "The Family Dinner Table." And it's been a favorite of mine for a while, so I wanted to share that with you. Everybody get a copy? Okay. All right, let's read it. Throughout the Bible, the word table has been used both literally and figuratively. When God gave instruction about the tabernacle, he ordered a table of showbread. The psalmist described the bounty of God's provision and that thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. In the time of Malachi, divine worship had been polluted in that animals which were sick or lame were brought for sacrifice. In doing so, Malachi charged that they said, in essence, the table of the Lord is contemptible. When Jesus sat at the Passover table with his disciples, he instituted the Lord's Supper and said, I appoint unto you a kingdom that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. The Lord's table holds a central place in the kingdom of the Lord. It is there that we remember his sacrifice, that we commune with the body and blood of our Savior, and that we look longingly to his coming again. Paul said we are partakers of the Lord's table, and pointed out that we cannot eat at the table of the Lord and the table of devils. We cannot have communion with both. As Paul asked later, what fellowship hath light with darkness? What communion hath the temple of God with idols? tables symbolize oneness, communion. How treacherous that one of Jesus' disciples, which sat at the table with him, should leave that place of closeness to strike his evil bargain to betray the Son of God. The family table. Historically, the family table has not only met the physical needs of its members, but has done much to nourish their emotional needs as well. In godly homes, the table has been the place where God is thanked for daily provisions. It has been a place for shared moments, for laughter, for concern, for instruction and training, and has done much to establish memories which contribute to lasting bonds within a family. Dinner is ready has been a welcome sound to many for a long time. The demands of modern life in our culture have been such that the value or even presence of a family table has been diminished. In many a household, families do not eat together. It is difficult to set a time when everyone is present at the same time. Work schedules, school functions, part-time jobs, the desire to eat in a separate room to see something on television, or the notion that I'll eat when I'm hungry has interfered with the family table. Many in the present time regard anything which smacks of a routine or schedule as sinister. Forgotten is the fact that family meals are not just to satisfy hunger. They are social events, a time for families to share the same food at the same time, to talk of the events of the day, learn about what happened at work, at school. It is an ideal time for children to listen to their parents and learn something of their heritage. It is a time which ought to challenge every parent to make the occasion special. But therein lies some of the problem. A family dinner demands, a dinner. And who shall prepare it? Whose turn is it to make dinner? The absence of a full-time homemaker in the modern home does create special problems about family meals. It is hard to set a time when everyone can be together. The lack of parental control of children whose whims and boorish manners set the agenda in too many households is a further hindrance to any kind of family dinner time. Parents who allow their children to grow up with picky eating habits deserve whatever grief and embarrassment that may cause them. I'm thinking of somebody. April, are you? The family table in a yard sale. I always knew the family dinner table was special, but I had it brought home to me in a poignant manner, which I will never forget. After my mother died in 1995, we decided to have a yard sale to dispose of things we did not intend to keep in the family. It fell the lot of Bobby and me to conduct the yard sale with the help of good folks from the congregation where my mother had attended at Rivermont, Chester, Virginia. We had 2 days of it, and it went fairly well. I have never liked yard sales, and somehow the excitement which seems to grip some about them has eluded me. It was distasteful to watch strangers rummage through things which my parents had handled so many times in the course of a lifetime. But I did all right with that until late the second day. We had all decided to sell the old kitchen table and 6 chairs. We used extra chairs at numerous times. The table was topped with a hard vinyl-like surface with chrome legs and strips around the top. The chairs had been patched a number of times, but were still sturdy and serviceable. Late that day, an older couple came and bought the table and chairs. As they loaded these on a pickup truck, I watched in silence as they hauled it up the hill. And then I had to go in the house for a while to collect my thoughts and emotions. Through my tears, I reflected on a flood of memories, all of which had that table right in the middle of them. At that table, we learned respect for each other, and especially our elders. We had our turns to say what we wanted to say, but we did not interrupt when the grown folks were talking. At the family supper table, I learned so much about the men with whom my father worked that I felt like I knew them all. From my father and mother, we learned much about our heritage. Our grandmother added much spice with her stories of time past. Somehow we felt attached to the people and places of which they spoke so fondly. At that table, I learned not to aggravate my brother, at least not in reach of my father's hand. The only time I remember that he ever physically struck me was over just such an occasion. It startled everyone and scared the living daylights out of me. My father's method of correction was usually to talk to us in such a way that we felt ashamed of ourselves. His sudden action was totally unexpected, uncharacteristic, and never forgotten. It was at the table when I was 11 years old that my parents explained to us why we were leaving the Christian church, in which we had many relatives and longtime friends. Serious Bible talk made lasting impressions. Somehow at that table, we were all one family. There we could mourn our losses, savor our victories, commiserate with one another, pass down folklore from one generation to another. There at that table, the pressures and stresses of the day of work, school, and play dissolved as we sat down together. The food was not always gourmet, but it was abundant, even in hard times, and lovingly prepared. We did not have the finest china and silverware, but we sure did set the table with love. And now that table, with all its memories, had just been hauled away by strangers who could never fully know what memories had been made around it. It was just an inanimate object. Had I known what emotions the selling of it would evoke, it would never have been sold. That inanimate object was the centerpiece of events which had much to do with who we all became and what we have tried to do with our lives. So amid the rush and press of life as it is lived today, don't forget the importance of the family dinner table. Take time to eat together, then sit back for a while and savor the moment and talk to each other. Neglecting the family dinner table will have the same harmful effect on your physical family as neglecting the table of the Lord will have on your spiritual family. Do you think it was just an accident that the Lord chose a table as the place to remember his suffering and to renew our hope for the world to come? Woo! Well, to me, that was powerful. And I read it this afternoon, it gave me goosebumps. I read it tonight, and it gave me goosebumps. But I thought that was very well expressed. And maybe you can relate to it, maybe you can't. If you can't relate to it, start instilling that in your home, the dinner table. What a difference it can and it will make. All right. Yeah? Sure.
But it's also a great training place, especially because I would say most of us probably offered our first prayer at the dinner table. And it's amazing sometimes the prayers a 4-year-old can offer, and I think sometimes it's good to be reminded to be thankful for bugs and ice cream. You know, and so we don't think about that a lot, but that getting together and allowing children to pray, letting them learn, is a great thing about the dinner table.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. The dinner table can provide such a wonderful training ground. One example, as you stated, with children learning to pray, whether that's at bedtime, but also the dinner table certainly provides that opportunity in allowing the children to take turns at the different meals to say a prayer and to see that growth in them. Todd?
Growing up in California, the churches are small there. The kids at school who had the strongest families, since there weren't many Christians to know, were the Mormons. And Mormons are known for having very strong families. One of the main reasons why it's hard to convert these young traveling elders is because they'd be giving up on mom and dad, right? They have a tradition of every Monday night is family night. You don't do extracurriculars of any kind, you're home. And I don't know if it's games or whatever, but to carve out an entire night of every week for just family time, it's more than just the meal, it's the entire evening. And it goes a long way. There's obviously a correlation there where the families stick together and are strong.
So, sadly, in great error, but their zeal, we need to have that kind of zeal with evangelism. And Todd's example with the Mormons, familiar with out in California where he grew up, was they carved out a night that was scheduled just for the family on Monday nights. All right. That's the second bell. Anything real quick as we wrap it up? All right, so we'll pick up, what was that, question 4, next Wednesday night, Lord willing. Thank you for your good comments. And thank you, Todd, for leading that song.